Hello there, Scott Golden, Golden Opportunities Coaching, and today's audio we're going to discuss 9 signs that you may be dealing with a traumatic brain response. What is a traumatic brain response? It is where your brain is still in trauma recovery mode. Think like when you have to reset your computer because it gets overloaded or starts to overheat, or there's too many windows on a screen. The human brain does the same thing, and so there are some signs that you've been through something your brain hasn't recovered from, and it'll come out in the way you behave and the way you view the world and the way you interact with others and all sorts of other things. One of the things that I coach people through is exactly that, trauma recovery, the relanguaging internally of a traumatic experience. And why do I do this? Well, because I had to do it for myself as a severe abuse survivor. I survived just about every type of abuse imaginable as a young person, and it took me 3 years to relanguage what happened to me in my own brain, of literally daily study, daily self-work. It was a really intense process when I went through it. That was more than 15 years ago, and I had lived in what I call the trauma core. The core of myself was influenced by trauma, and it influenced every one of my actions. And this happened until my, let's say mid-20s. So we're talking, at least 15 years ago. Part of the reason I got into coaching was because I saw a lack in traditional psychology, psychiatry in dealing with trauma properly. Furthermore, I was raised by 2 parents whom had trauma core issues that never got proper treatment. And it is my hypothesis and my understanding that the reason I was so severely abused is because they did not receive the proper trauma core treatment. And so as a coach, that's why I specialize. Obviously, when I'm in over my head, I do farm people out to more certified professionals, people that can prescribe medication and that. I can't do that because I don't agree with the DSM and the labeling of people. I believe it does more harm than good. But at the end of the day, it is useful in some very rare situations and in some percentages. In any event, let's get on to the audio. I've had most of these symptoms at one point in my life or another. And so I can speak to them, from first-hand knowledge, but also in working with over 12,000 people in 40 countries. Every one of the things I'm going to list here is extremely common. So if you're going through one or more of these, you're not alone. And I think not being alone is one of the most important things that you have to look at. So the first one is you doubt when good things happen. If you've been through trauma, your brain is wired firstly for self-protection. The first thing you do is automatically, within about the first 15 to 30 seconds of assessing any situation, is you look for the danger in the situation. You're looking for that hole that could get you hurt. And so when something good happens, when someone gives you a compliment, or when someone says, hey, I'll come over and give you a ride to the store, or when someone says, hey, I'll loan you $20, or somebody does anything nice for you, if you're a trauma core victim, your first reaction is to go, uh-oh, what do they want? How are they going to take advantage of me? What's wrong with this picture? What's their hustle? What's their game? How are they going to get over on me? What's the problem? And so this will make you react in one of 2 ways predominantly. Either you're going to tell them that they don't have to do it. That is to say, they don't have to help you. They don't, you're not worthy of the help. Go help somebody else. Or they're going to ask you, are you sure? Are you really sure you want to do this? Are you, 100% sure? But believe it or not, that's the automatic response of the trauma core in the brain saying, wait a second. Anytime anybody's offered to help me before, it usually leads to something bad. So let me just make sure this person isn't two sides of crazy that they are trying to get something from me or somehow run a hustle, run a game. So if you find that you're afraid to believe something good can happen to you, then don't believe that it's okay to not believe that it's going to last, and just go to a simpler frame of mind. Something good is happening right now. I can witness, I can feel, sense, see, hear something good happening right now. It doesn't matter what happens in the next moment. I embrace what's happening in the now, and that is good enough, right? When we get there, we actually start to remap how the brain sees positive events, and over time that helps the healing process. So the second one is the desire to over-control or overtly control situations. This will manifest in a whole bunch of ways, such as a person may ask so many questions that they have worn a person down into doing things their way without the other person realizing it. Another is they give instructions rather than asking questions. Something like, "You're going to do this, right?" We could, instead of saying, "We could try this. What do you think?" They're going to tell you what you're going to do. They're going to tell you how you're going to respond to something, how you're going to behave. And it's a subtle way of gaining control, because if they're telling you and you agree, they know you're going to follow through, which actually brings the level of anxiety caused from trauma core down. If a person who's been through a lot of trauma can predict reasonably how you're going to react, then interacting with you is much simpler than dealing with the potential unknown. And so the more control a person who's been through trauma has, the easier it is for them to go, okay, I can reasonably trust, at least for this moment, that this person isn't going to betray me, isn't going to double-cross me, isn't going to harm me in any way. Because you have to understand, again, and this is, I can't stress enough, and I've worked with people that have been through rape and assault. I've worked with people that have been through car accidents. I've worked with people that have been through war. And the one thing that every trauma victim that I've ever worked with has in common is their natural inclination instinctually to protect themselves takes away all logic and emotion, at least for the first few seconds of dealing with any situation. And so the instinct to say, how can I gain control in this situation, isn't something they mean to do. It's actually so bred into them that they are doing it without even realizing it. So another one that's super common is the fear paralysis. Fear paralysis is a thing where one wants to move forward, but they rationalize all the things that can go wrong without or with taking any sort of chance. So fear paralysis will come up in multiple ways. Suppose you are at work and you want to approach your boss about taking time off. And so you rehearse in your head, sometimes dozens of times, hey, I'd like to have Friday off. I'm willing to work on Saturday, or willing to come in 1 hour early every day next week if I can just have this one day off, and here's the reason I need it. And then what happens is they rehearse so much that they're having a conversation in their head with the other person, anticipating how they're going to respond. And unfortunately, most of the time the responses are never positive, because, again, that protective nature, the cognitive bias of a person who's been through a lot of trauma is to think, okay, what can this person say that's going to undo me? What can this person say that's going to upset me? What can this person say that's going to take me off course? And so when you flood yourself with, well, they could say this and this and this and this and this and this and that, and you don't give room for anything positive at all, it leaves you paralyzed to do nothing, because you've convinced yourself that there's no possible way they're going to agree. And so dealing with this particular symptom is extremely difficult, but one way to begin dealing with it, to open up the brain and help the brain function differently, is to say, if this person was on my side from the beginning, how would I approach them? If I already knew that they were willing to hear me, how would I word what I'm going to ask or what I'm going to say? And if you can do it from that perspective, radically accept that they have a desire to be on your side, then it's easier to move past the fear because the fear has been neutralized already. And this goes into the next one. They kind of overlap, but one holds themselves back from taking opportunities, taking chances, because of the fear of rejection, because of the fear of being caught off guard, because of the fear of not knowing what's coming next. They'll hold themselves back from taking opportunities. This manifests especially in things like dating, or if a person has been abused and they want to, for example, initiate emotional or physical intimacy with their partner, but they're afraid. They'll hold themselves back from doing anything or saying anything because they're fixated on the potential rejection, and it may come out later. Something like their partner or their friends or their family may think, oh, well, they don't want to interact with me, or they don't care about me, or they're aloof, or they're cold, or whatever, when in reality, that fear paralysis that's causing them to hold themselves back is actually so overwhelming that it can cause negative emotional responses, anger, tears, rage, sadness, anxiety, frustration, and all these things. And then, most often, when a person comes back from the automatic fear response, the other thing that you'll get is the person who's living from their trauma core saying, well, you should know that I want to do this, 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 and this, but I can't because of this, 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 and this. And all of a sudden, it's almost like they're living in an alternate world. And in truth, the world inside the head of a trauma survivor is an alternate world much of the time. And so that is something to consider. One thing you can do if you're dealing with someone in your life who has trauma core issues is say to them, wait a minute, where's your mind going? What's going on in your head about this issue right now? What's your worst case scenario? What's your worst fear? Like what's going on there? Because if they can verbalize it to you in a non-committed way that this is actually going to happen, but it's possible that it could, then you can talk through that irrational fear from what I call the helicopter seat or the observer seat, the above oneself rather than the in the midst of it. This is extremely helpful for people who have had something like a PTSD or been, victims of an unexpected accident, because then it's like, well, the fear is I'm going to get hurt again. Okay, but right now in this environment, what is there that can hurt you? And then you talk it through. Now, these conversations are very heavy. They're very deep. They often lead to negative emotional responses, tears, anger, emotional shutdown, and all these things. So one thing that's important to note, if you're a caregiver or a partner or a friend or a family member to somebody who has a lot of trauma core issues, don't bring up the subject if you don't have some time to follow it through with a meaningful conversation. In other words, you can't expect a person who has trauma core, well, you can, but it's unproductive. You shouldn't expect a person who has trauma core issues to be able to have a really short, concise conversation about what they're feeling and why they're feeling it, most of the time because the emotions are so flood-driven that there's 4 or 5, 6 emotions all at once going on, and they have to detangle it right in front of you in order to have the conversation. So a lot of times a person with trauma core issues will restart the same task again and again and again. They'll read the same line in a book. They will start to organize a room, get lost, think it's not good enough, tear it down, do it all over again. They will start to plan a date, and they'll go, is that good enough? No, that's not good enough, and they'll throw it away. This will also, for creative people, trauma response looks like I'm starting to write song lyrics, and I destroy 80 pages worth of song lyrics before I even put forward a first effort, because A, I've gotten so distracted from the emotions that the lyrics bring out of me, but B, I'm a perfectionist and I don't think anything's ever going to be good enough. I remember when I was going through my own trauma core experience, and one of the fundamental lies that my biological parents, and for the record, you'll hardly ever hear me call them parents, because in truth, emotionally, I was raised more by my grandmother than anybody else. My biological parents were never there for me, and I was taking care of myself emotionally and in a lot of ways basic living needs by 9 years old. I was paying bills and doing other things by that age, and so I don't acknowledge my biological parents for much of anything other than teaching me who not to be. But in any event, people who are dealing with holding themselves back often will do it because they're afraid to get reprimanded by their abuser, by their assailant for moving too quickly or going too fast in a positive direction. It's almost like having good things happen is a punishable offense. The next one is they will not ask for help, they will not accept help. I still, 15 plus years later, struggle with this. So if you're out there and you've been through a traumatic experience and you're like 6 months in or you're a year in and it's hard to ask for help, know that that's part of the emotional core. Know that that's part of the trauma response. Know that your brain is going to a false belief immediately about you realizing it, that asking for help is a sign of weakness. Asking for help is a sign of vulnerability. Asking for help is for people who are less than, or some other facsimile of lie is being told to your brain before you can even realize the benefit. I've gotten to a place in my own journey, and many of my trauma recovery colleagues and trauma recovery clients have gotten to the same place. I can ask for help as long as I can say, is there anything I can do for you in return? In other words, it's an even trade. I couldn't do that for a whole bunch of years, but now I'm good with help being a trade. In very rare circumstances, if I've known you for an extended period of time, I'll accept help on the face value of your character. But in my own experience, I have to see a person is consistent in character for several months before I will accept random acts of help from them or even consider doing so. So if it's hard for you to ask for help, if you feel demeaned in asking for help, if you're afraid of physical, mental, emotional, or verbal retaliation, chances are you're living through your trauma core. Let's see. There's 3 more here, but I can combine these two into one. You struggle with self-hate. You come up with all the reasons why you're what's wrong with the world. You may act on these things. You may self-harm. You may have suicidal ideation. You may have homicidal ideation. You may have genocidal ideation where you just want to go and nuke everybody. And to be fair, one of my core beliefs is that a lot of the global shooters we have, a lot of the, Columbine's anniversary was yesterday. And I can't believe that was what we're talking 21 years ago now. But whether it's the Columbine shooters or the shooter at Virginia Tech or the shooter in various places, as we look at like malls and the movie theater guy who did the Joker thing, I would venture to say that all of them struggled with self-hate. I would venture to say that all of them were internally struggling with feelings of value, and that they gained their sense of value and significance through doing something that caused immense harm. I also, and this is, if I ever have a political platform, I would advocate for this with every government in the world. I believe we need a place for people that have been through trauma to go and reset their brains that is not a mental hospital. In other words, it's not a punishment where we're around other crazy people. We need a preferably government-sponsored or nonprofit environment where people that have been through trauma can go, and literally what they do is they spend days at a time unpacking this is what happened to me. This is how I'm interpreting it. I need a new interpretation to move forward. If I don't have a new interpretation, I will not move forward in society. Please don't send me out there. And just to share, in interest of full disclosure, my first love committed suicide in 2007, and she had been in a mental health facility 9 days before her passing. Now, I'm not going to name any names or do anything so that the world can go digging, A, because it's disrespectful to her family, and B, that information is irrelevant to the reason I'm sharing it. But anyhow, she had been in a mental health facility up until 9 days before her passing, and she got a notice or some sort of conversation with a doctor, and all. I remember it like it's yesterday. That whole week and a half period is forever burned in my brain, because she'd been struggling for years with issues of what I now know to be trauma core-centered stuff related to sexual abuse. And so she was saying to them, don't let me out of here. I'm not good. I'm not good to go. I'm not good to go. And in this case, and her family chose not to pursue a lawsuit. I wish they would have, in her memory. They could have started a nonprofit. They could have done all that interesting things. But anyway, they didn't. And it still bothers me all these years later. But anyhow, she got out. She called me, and we'd been going back and forth in and out of each other's lives for 10 years by this point. We were each other's ride or die. And she called me, and she said, I'm not going to make it. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, they let me go because my insurance wouldn't cover another day, and they knew I was in hard financial experiences, and they said, we've got to let you go because it's X amount of dollars a day to keep you here, and we don't think you can pay it. We'll give you a ride wherever you want to go, or we'll give you a bus pass, but you're SOL. And, obviously the medical profession falsified records saying that never happened, and those records are on point, but there are staff members from that hospital that collaborated her story. Anyway, 9 days later, because of the overwhelming stress from the trauma and being rejected by the traditional system, she chose to end her life. And that was 2007. And here we sit in 2020. October will be the 13-year anniversary. And I've dedicated my life to helping people in trauma recovery because of her passing. For me, the real language of I lost my first love. I lost the person who helped me to deal with emotion for the first time in my life. I had to relanguage that to mean, and I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life, however long I have, to helping other people who have been where she is, so that they don't have to suffer as much as she did. Look, I'm no hero. I can't save a life of a person who doesn't want help. And I can't be a person's solution. But as a coach, I can be there to say, you're okay no matter what your feelings are. You're okay no matter where you are in the world. You can recover. There is hope for you. And if that's what the universe has for me to do with the rest of my life, I'm good with that. And I'm sorry that her passing was a reason for that to be my life's mission, but it is. And other than losing her, there's no regret in that for me. But anyway, self-hate is such a big thing. The other thing that goes along with that, just to move this along a little bit, is stoicism. People that have been through extreme core trauma are stoic. They show no emotion or try to show no emotion because emotion opens one up to being hypersensitive. One, there's the danger. In other words, if I've been through trauma and I am struggling with memories or flashbacks or PTSD, which actually ties us in with our last one, which is the majority of people who have trauma core challenges have PTSD. Many of them disassociate. Many of them have things that would be labeled by the DSM as borderline personality, but usually all these things are traced back to trauma. In any way, a person who has a trauma core challenge is going to be stoic more often than not, because being emotional for a person that's been through trauma, it's like you don't know when to turn the hose off, right? So it's either drip, 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 and you're barely getting emotion out of the person, or flood, and they can't control their own emotions. So it's better to play stoic. It's better to pretend one has no emotions whatsoever. Matter of fact, so often when I do couples coaching and I do relationship coaching, I'll hear one person say something like, "Hey, he never shows any emotion. She never tells me how she feels." And then further along in the conversation, I'll say something to that person like, "Hey, tell me about your worst life experience. Tell me about that most traumatic thing that happened." And then they'll inevitably talk about something that probably happened years ago. And then I'll say, "What does that mean to you? How does that shape how you see the world?" And inevitably, there is a tie-in at least 95% of the time with, "It's not safe to show how I really feel about things." Some facsimile of that line of thinking and reasoning becomes a part of the motivating factor for trauma core victims, and it's because in some cases, in very extreme cases, for victims of child abuse and exploitation, we were threatened by our abuser that if we showed any emotions, we'd get worse abuse and more regular abuse. That's one. The other is the realization that if I show emotion, I get taken advantage of, or somebody plays on me and they lie to me and they manipulate me. Two, so if a person is exceptionally stoic and you're dealing with them, you never see them crack a smile or show any sort of happiness or change in mood or affect, I would bet at least 80% of the time you're dealing with someone who's living through a trauma core experience. Anyway, this has been 9 ways to know that you're dealing with someone who's been through trauma. I am Scott Golden. We are still running our social reconnection special. That's through the national lift. It's not just states, but the national lift of the pandemic lockdown. If you are new to our coaching services here, you can be locked in at the $50 rate, which is the lowest rate we offer. If there is anyone out there that rate is still too high for you, well, we do run some scholarship programs, so don't feel obligated to not reach out because the price mentioned is too high. Much instead, reach out either here on YouTube in the inbox or on Twitter at PO Perception. We'll see what we can do about helping you out to get the assistance you need. Once again, Scott Golden, life, relationship, creativity coach, motivational speaker, and keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.